We have a special guest with us today. Usually you just see Mr. Bowen and I, but we do have an LSU grad here with us, Dr. Jared Stevenson. So, he sat in y'all's shoes not too long ago, but, I'm not going to do too much talking about it. But anyway, he went to LSU, and we're talking today about osteopathic medicine. If you don't know what that is, of course, stay tuned today. He's going to share a little bit about his journey, of course, being at LSU, going to medical school, residency. He's in his fellowship now. So that's my grand intro. Jared's a friend of mine, but he's also someone great I think you guys can learn from as he shares, especially his decision-making process through the time. So, Jared, I'll pass it off to you just to share your story of medicine and your journey.
Yeah. Like Matt said, thank you for having me, and for Carly joining us today. It's great. And for all those going to listen later. But yeah, like Matt said, I went to LSU not too long ago. It feels like forever. I graduated coming up on 10 years ago now in 2013. And I was a kinesiology major, so a little bit untraditional, I guess you could say, but still had some traditional roots in those life sciences and things. I was pretty involved in groups. I think I was a member kind of in standing with some of the pre-med societies, but really involved in some different ministries. I did stuff at the refuge at the time, but then really got involved with campus outreach on campus as well. I was in for a short time, I was in a Christian fraternity there called Beta Upsilon Chi. I don't know if it's still active, but just knew that, kind of wanting to have some kind of healthcare of, related career, that grad schools for that really kind of looked at being a well-rounded applicant. So are you a good student? Do you live a normal, kind of a normal life, and are you involved in different things in that community? And so knowing that was important, wanted to get involved, not to where I was spread so thin, but just be involved to show that, hey, you can balance life and studies and these things. And then, also knew that they wanted to see healthcare specific, like shadowing and volunteer opportunities. So I did a lot of that, shadowed like pediatricians in the area, shadowed an orthopedic surgeon, some different doctors when I would go back home in the summers and things like that, just to kind of show like, hey, I'm really am interested in this and moving towards it. Did a 4-year kinesiology degree, made sure I got all my prerequisites, which I know the advice council here through with Robbie and Matt, they do a good job of like really laying out everything that you're going to need. So you can kind of study whatever you want. And it's just like, hey, if you are interested in medicine, make sure you get these classes and these prerequisites and things like that. So then like towards the end, initially I wanted to do like physical therapy, but kind of as I transitioned through my career as a student at LSU, I started to look more into medicine. I was like, hey, this seems like a lot of fun. I think I would enjoy doing that. And I was looking at, like everybody wants to want to go to Johns Hopkins or Harvard or Baylor, UCLA, like these huge meccas in the medical community. And you're like, I want to go there. And so you start looking into that. And I was curious about those, but I started doing some research. And just for me, particularly, like those are super competitive, very cutthroat to get into. But then also once you're there, at least the stories were like that at that time. It's probably different now. I had a physician growing up for some kidney issues, and my mom goes, "Hey, this guy, he's an osteopathic physician." I was like, "What's that?" And so I started looking. I just did some research on like, hey, what is osteopathic medicine? Like, what is this? And the more I learned about it, kind of that background in kinesiology, that desire, that interest in physical therapy, kind of these tenets of physical medicine related to all these things, like really kind of tied into what osteopathic medicine is and like what like their philosophy and approach to medicine. And it just really seemed to line up with like the way I view other people in the world around me. And just kind of their philosophy and approach to medicine was something that I really agreed with, and at the time seemed to be very different than traditional or allopathic medicine. Like once you get in that, you realize that there's two different branches. You have your MDs, which are allopathic medicine. You have your DOs, which are osteopathic medicine. Still both fully licensed, capable, functional, trained physicians to practice any kind of medicine you want. Just a different title, right? So you have a DO and an MD. When I was kind of going through, it was still kind of this like tenuous situation between allopathic and osteopathic physicians. And, we've done a lot of work to get to kind of level the playing field between. And so it's a much more cooperative situation now. But yeah, just like that overlap of like my personal philosophy and paradigm looking at the world around me, osteopathic medicine seemed to really fit. And then they were a lot as well known, so they were a little bit easier to get into. Like they weren't as competitive. You didn't have to have this, astronomical MCAT scores, which I can't really talk to that anymore because it's I think we were like 5 versions past what I took initially. And so like and even the level or step exams have changed to like pass fail now once you're in med school. But you could get like a little bit of a good score, but you didn't need like a 36. You could get in I got in with a 28. And so like just kind of all that boiled down to like, hey, let's go for osteopathic medicine, and had a great time there. Like this, we were talking about earlier, I went to VCOM. So a lot of osteopathic schools are very long names that they just shorten to an acronym. And so that stands for the Edward Via Virginia College of Osteopathic Medicine. They now have 4 campuses. The original was started back, I think, in 2005 or so in Blacksburg, Virginia. Then they started the Carolinas campus, where I went in 2010, in Spartanburg, South Carolina. In 2015, they opened the Auburn campus. And then I believe 2020 was the inaugural year for the campus at Monroe. So that kind of, and some of the tenets or the philosophies of osteopathic medicine, they focus, no matter where you go, they have a focus on training primary care physicians to go into rural and underreached communities to provide medical care and access to people who don't readily have that. And so that kind of sets the trajectory for where VCOM has placed their campuses in order to strategically place students into community hospitals that are smaller so that they can train and kind of go back to work there. I say med school, just like anybody and everybody will tell you, is very hard, but it's doable. So like it was a lot of hard work. You have to be really dedicated and diligent to your studies. But like they are, like once you're in, like there's some people, like you find out, I think we had three classmates come in the first week or, so they were like, this isn't for me, and they left. And that happens. But most people, once you're in med school, like all the weeding out stuff was done up to that point, and now you're in, and it's like, okay, everybody in that school, faculty, staff, are there to support you and help you get through it. So it's very, very doable. But I would say just with that, like some people decide it's not, just recommend like be absolutely certain and absolutely sure that this is what I want to do. And yeah, it's still school. So you still have some time off and, for holidays and breaks. And so make sure you enjoy life. Don't be all about the work, but be all about the work, if that makes any sense. So work hard and make sure you're committed to that, but make sure you take time to kind of relax and enjoy life as well. So I guess I was in upstate South Carolina for medical school. Went to rural Alabama for my 3rd year rotations. So a lot of times, like if you are looking into like LSU, these major academic centers that have a school, like it's the medical school, and then there's kind of a hospital attached to that. So it's kind of easy access for like med students to go in and do their rotations there. Most osteopathic schools, with the exception of, I think, Michigan State, which is one of the only state sponsored osteopathic schools, they rely on what they call private public partnerships. And so it's a private school that gets partnerships with public hospitals and communities to take a certain number of students to rotate there as their core rotations. And then it's kind of on the students. If you want to go do different electives, it's like you got to find it and kind of plug yourself in and get there. So just if that's something that, concerns you guys as pre-med students, like that's something to consider when you're approaching this decision. So graduated med school in 2018. Then I this past June graduated from my residency. I did that in pediatrics, actually at Our Lady of the Lake, right down the street. And honestly, just to prepare you guys, I know sitting in undergrad, I often, like, once I got into med school and got into residency, I was like, gosh, I wish somebody would have told me like how hard this really is. And it, like, one, the difficulty is fairly subjective, but like each person takes it and handles it differently. But I felt like residency was actually harder than medical school. And most of that, I think, is primarily just so because like you're learning to balance so much. Like you're a brand new physician and you're learning how to do that. You're learning how to be an adult and do like all these other things and balancing life in the midst of like this high stress situation of like, I'm responsible for the healthcare of people. And so it's, so like there's a lot to balance and figure out in residency, but it's designed exactly for that, to train you guys and to learn that stuff. So again, that's doable. And I had a fairly hard time adjusting to that pressure in that situation. And so I would just like prepare yourself going in like, okay, med school's done. I'm going into residency. It's going to be hard, but really slow down and focus on the learning. You are there to learn. You are not there to know everything. And you like, as you train, you'll gain confidence, you'll gain knowledge, you'll gain understanding how to put all that information together. And then you become a better physician in time. And then, finished that in June of 21. And now I'm up here in Madison, Wisconsin doing, it's a relatively new fellowship. It's been around for about 15 years. It's called Non-Operative Pediatric Orthopedics. A lot of people hear that and they go, oh, like sports medicine. And while there is some overlap with sports medicine or primary care sports medicine, it's not quite the same. Typically, the easiest way to think about it is like, I'm a pediatric orthopedist. I just don't operate. I don't take kids to the operating room and put in spinal fusion rods, do osteotomies to rotate. But I specialize in the diagnosis and management of a lot of those things that don't require surgery or up until the point that they do. So that's what I've been doing for the last 7-8 months. I'll finish up at the end of June this year. And then signing a contract with Children's Healthcare of Atlanta to be their clinical anchor for pediatric orthopedics in Athens, Georgia. So I will always, Tigers, go Tigers at heart forever and ever. But on face value, I will support the Dogs, especially because they just put the wallop to Alabama. So.
That's right.
But yeah, that's kind of my story.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that, Jared. There's nothing like hearing someone like you who's actually, been through it, walked through it, and then, of course, just sharing, those, like how you said that it's hard but doable. Having that good mindset. I'd love for you just to share a little bit. You mentioned the specialty you're in, and obviously you're there now, which is nice because the decisions are over. But I guess walk back to before when the decisions weren't made yet, where you had to decide, okay, which osteopathic school then which specialty, and then, okay, now I'm going to do a fellowship in an even further specialty. How do you kind of make those decisions when there's so many options out there?
Yeah. So how did I pick the school that I went to? And so by the time I had to make the decision for medical school, I had pretty much decided that I was going to do osteopathic medicine regardless. So I wasn't looking at any allopathic programs anymore. So that kind of limited it down. At the time, I think there were only like 26 DO schools in the nation. There's obviously a few more now. And so I was like, okay, where, and then I kind of looked at like geographical location. I was like, okay, where am I interested in going? And I really like the mountains. I like hiking, mountain biking, things like that. And I was like, okay, I don't want to be way up north in like Pennsylvania on the border of Canada. I don't really care to go back to California. And out, necessarily out west. There was a school in Colorado that I tried to get into. So it was mostly like, okay, what are the things I'm interested in doing like outside of school, and where are the places that I can kind of do that in the times that I will be able to. And so that kind of, I was like, okay, I can do like the West in the Rockies, which was, only a handful of programs, or I can do kind of in the mid-Atlantic region, closer to the mountains there. And so then there were like 6 schools that I kind of found it was like, I could go there. And so I sent out my primary applications. I got 4 secondaries back. And then obviously, sorry, backtracking a little bit, researching the individual programs. So make sure you do some research into the schools and the programs where you want to go. And this would apply to residency as well. And make sure they have what you want, and they teach, and everything is set up in a way that kind of you agree with, and they have the things that you kind of want to see in your training, in your education. So that kind of led me to kind of North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, kind of that area. There was one school in Florida that seemed like a really nice school to go to. But I never heard back after a secondary application with them. But yeah, then I went on an interview at the school in Colorado, an interview with the school in Tennessee, and an interview with the school in South Carolina, where I ultimately ended up going. And when you go on interviews, they talk a lot, like when you're in medical school, they talk a lot about this in residency, and then even more so in residency when you're getting ready to go to fellowship, if that's something you decide to do, or jobs. And it's like when you're on an interview, like you want to practice your interviews to be prepared of how to answer questions and what kind of questions they might ask you going into medical school. But you also want to be like, they're trying to gauge like who you are as a student and as a person, and like see if are you going to be a good fit for us at our school. Then you also need to be gauging the interview process for yourself when you're interviewing with these faculty members at these schools, and saying like, okay, would I want to learn from this person? Like, could I have a good learning relationship with this staff person or this faculty member? And if you don't, like, if you kind of like, I don't really feel like I do well here, or I fit in, that's sometimes a good thought that maybe they shouldn't be at the top of your list. So you're also trying to figure out, am I a good fit here at this program? Because you want to be a good fit, because when you fit well, you'll learn better. So that's something, it's not everything, but it's a big part of later, like interviews later on. Like when you go to a job, you're like, hey, can I work with this other physician? Can I work with these staff members? Am I going to be a good fit here? And so kind of get into a habit of gauging that interview process early on, but also with a grain of salt, knowing that, hey, this is probably going to be awkward for me because I'm young, and this is really the first interview I've ever had for these things. And each interview might get a little bit better, but I had some interviews I get at the school in Colorado and the school in Tennessee where it was just kind of like that question just didn't sit right. Like, why did you ask me that? Or why, you asked me that, I answered it truthfully, and then why did you respond that way? Because sometimes they'll respond, and I had one interviewer that responded to an answer I gave to his question that really kind of put me down, and I was just like, I just answered it. Like, there are obviously opportunities to do these things here, but I was interested in doing like medical missions, like overseas. And he was like, well, you can do that here. And I was like, I realized that. So you just want to kind of get a gauge. And when I interviewed at VCOM in South Carolina, I really felt like a great match. I had like, it didn't really feel like an interview. It felt like a natural flowing conversation. And again, it's a grain of salt because that was that subjective experience. You could have great interviews that feel like interviews and want to go to a school, and it didn't necessarily feel like a conversation. That doesn't mean you need to, write off that place. It's just that it kind of had that feel for me that made me very comfortable with going there and choosing to go there. So those are kind of like the big things.
That's great. That's very interesting, sharing that. And then how about just your personal choice on specialties, peds, and then going into orthopedics as well?
Yeah. So I always wanted to do pediatric medicine, whatever it was. Early on, I had a fascination with the human heart. And so I was like, ooh, maybe pediatric cardiology or pediatric cardiothoracic surgery, and things like that kind of piqued my interest. But I always knew that pediatrics something was what I wanted to do. I wanted to work with kids, and that came from kind of understanding like gifts that God had given me and ways that I had of interacting with kids and interacting with parents from different past experiences, being camp counselors, working in Sunday schools, things like that. I knew I was geared towards working with children. And then as I continued to rotate through the, second 2 years of medical school and work with surgeons, work with medical doctors and things like that, I found like, I really don't want to be a surgeon like that. So it kind of, okay, you get rid, like, because it takes a lot of hard work to be a surgeon. And I was like, I don't want to do that. Not that I didn't want the hard work. I just was like, I could be happy in medicine, not operating all the time. And so I was like, okay, well, let's do pediatrics. And I had found physical medicine and rehab, which is a relatively new field of medicine, and tried to get into that, but that didn't end up working out for me. And I was like, okay, well, I know pediatrics. And so I went into general pediatric residency program. And with my interest in physical medicine and rehab, when I would rotate with the orthopedic surgeons at the Children's Hospital in Baton Rouge in residency, they started shifting my focus and telling me about this non-operative pediatric orthopedics fellowship position. I was like, that's really interesting. Looked into it. A lot of overlap with peds rehab. And I was like, okay, like that seems like a good fit. And so read more about it, got to know the doctors up here and started talking to them. And then, and like just having, really enjoy physical and musculoskeletal medicine. It's a little bit more concrete. And so easier for my mind to grasp, rather than some of the like nephrology, pulmonology, things that are a little bit more abstract to me, and harder to grasp. So that like knowing and understanding myself and kind of how I think and operate and where my limitations are kind of funneled me down this path.
Awesome. That's great. So shared a lot of good things today, and so I just want you to finish this off just with like one last piece of advice to your your freshman, sophomore, junior self at LSU?
Yeah. So I kind of wrote this stuff out. So like I've got like two pieces. One, and the first one has kind of a two-part thing, and it's like learn how you study. So people talk about like audio visual, like tactile, procedural kind of learning. And so use your time in undergraduate studies to figure out how you learn best, while bearing in mind that when you get to med school, your method of studying might need to change. And then when you get to med school, try to figure out how you're going to study that material best early to set yourself up for future success. Because like medical school and undergraduate studies are two entirely different things. You've got 4 years to learn, a bunch of stuff at a slower pace, and you've got really 2 years to learn twice as much information, at rapid fire pace. And so the way you study might be different. And so have an open mind of like trying to figure that out early on. Then I would say you're going to graduate undergrad in May. You're going to start med school in like July or August. That's going to be like 6 to 8 weeks or so, 4 to 8 weeks of time off. Enjoy it. Don't like try to be like, oh, I've got to read this book and study this information and be like you're going to have time to like do all that in med school. Take a break, take a vacation, enjoy your time off before med school starts, just to kind of set yourself up for a less stressful, relaxing transition in.
Awesome. Well, that concludes our time today, but, really appreciative of Dr. Stevenson sharing his story. And, I'm sure if you have some follow-up questions, I'm happy to pass, send me an email and I can pass them on to Dr. Stevenson. He can respond that way. But, this is just, he's like you, one of you guys that, you have this dream and you put your head down and work hard, and now he's doing what he set out to do. So congratulations to you, Jared, for, obviously almost finishing your fellowship, for, it's awesome you're working on that contract in Georgia, for, about to get married in a couple weeks here. So, I mean, all the big things at once, so congrats to you, and thanks for joining us today. And thank you for everybody for
Jared, just so you know, there's now 38 osteopathic medical schools. So they're opening one every year, just about. And we have 59 LSU students applying to osteopathic school this year. So.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Congratulations to everybody, all the students that are getting ready to get in, and keep up the hard work. You guys are doing great.
Thank you guys, and we'll see you at the next one.